Okay. I'll introduce myself, Karen. I know a lot of you, but I work at Chick-fil-A. I'm an analyst at Chick-fil-A in our financial services department. And in addition to working at Chick-fil-A, I am married and have 4 children, ages 1, 2, almost 3, 6, and 8. So I know a thing or two about being a wife and mom and working full time. And this situation that we're currently in now is definitely like putting probably the biggest strain, I guess, that like I've ever felt personally. Just I'm homeschooling 2 kids now and trying to like work and juggle all of it. So this discussion couldn't have even really come at a better time. I think this is like really highlighting a lot of that, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are like feeling that as well, men and women. Anna, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, first of all, I feel exactly that. I have 2 little boys, 5 and 8. And so I'm teaching kindergarten and 2nd grade all of a sudden, while trying to juggle all my work duties as well. I am the training director for Data Crunch. We are suddenly moving trainings to virtual, and I'm having to train trainers on how to teach virtually. So it's been a really, really cool experience to be able to morph and be able to grow in such a short time, but it's also very stressful, as you can imagine. And before this, I was actually a math and statistics teacher in the Atlanta area. I was, for 14 years, I taught math and statistics. So before that, before I went to grad school to be a teacher, I did work very, very briefly in like a consulting situation with data. And I'll talk about that later in some of my answers. But ultimately it is very, like you said, the timing that we're going to talk about how our roles play in our job with regards to differences, similarities. I think this is an interesting discussion, especially for what we're going through right now.
Definitely. Stacy?
Hey, I'm Stacy Lynch. I also have kids that could run in the room at any second. I have a 5-year-old and a 13-year-old. And so it's an interesting time. I work at Cox Media Group, and my team is specifically responsible for analytics about digital products, data, revenue, audiences. And previous to that, I actually started out in academia at Northwestern University, and I did kind of more, conventional marketing research and consumer research and modeling and that kind of thing. And then my career's had a lot of turns. I've done consulting, and I've done product development, and I've worked in financial services and done a bunch of different stuff. But probably for the last few years, I've been working mostly with like bigger data, and I'm probably like 6 years with Tableau, I think. Yeah, so I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say on this panel. I'm just going to say right now.
Excellent. And Kelly, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Gilbert. I'm a principal data engineer at Chick-fil-A with Karen. I support our HR and franchisee selection areas. Prior to coming to Chick-fil-A, I've been at Chick-fil-A about 7 years. And then prior to that, I spent about 10 years at Home Depot in various analytics roles in supply chain.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. It's awesome to have you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the panelists doing this, like I said, and being so flexible and doing it virtually. I really appreciate it, and so does Nelson. Let's get started. A little bit about like our journey, like just to get where you are today. I'm going to focus questions now on kind of how you got where you are today. And first question, I'll direct this one to Stacy. And Stacy, what type of work were you doing earlier in your career? Could you just tell us a little bit about like earlier in your career, your journey to get where you are now?
Right. Well, I got so excited about this question, I answered it a little early, but I've done a lot of different kinds of stuff, and I've been at it long enough that I was working before I think data science was a thing, or analytics really was a thing. So I started off with more kind of market behavioral research, and that data came from, not from transactional data as much like we have now. It was from different sources. And so I started off with like more modeling and that kind of thing. And then in a lot of more mix of like qualitative and quantitative work. And then as my career has progressed, I've gone progressively more quantitative. I think in part because, you know, there's so much more available, and I've kind of gravitated toward those tools and doing that kind of stuff. So now pretty much what I do is, you know, quantitative metrics and analysis and dashboards all day long.
Excellent. All right, Anna, can you tell us maybe, or just describe like a point, any kind of inflection point in your career where maybe you felt drawn? You mentioned like you were in teaching earlier in your career. What was it like? Was there a certain point that made you like pause and pivot towards like working with data and information and data visualization?
So full disclosure, I previewed this question before, and I remember looking at going, this is a very hard question. I wanted to say, Karen, can we change it? And then I decided, no, I'll try to muddle my way through it, because I think it started not with data visualization. In fact, when I worked with what you would call data visualization, I didn't call it that. That's kind of a relatively new term for me. And so when I say data visualization, I still go back to my, statistics and bars and charts and graphs and things like that. So when I was in undergrad at UGA, I was a business major, and I gravitated more towards metrics and numbers, but I didn't, just like pretty much any undergraduate, you don't know what you're going to do. When I graduated, I worked for a consulting company in DC. It's actually a best practices research firm, if you really want to call it the right thing. And we were working with research. I was still like low man on the totem pole, working with survey data. Well, this is in between 2000 and 2002, when we weren't really talking data and metrics, but I was just fascinated with. I was always infatuated with analytics, but we didn't really call it that. We were just looking at statistics and numbers, and it was some modeling, very similar to what Stacy was saying. We modeled and we used survey data to draw conclusions about another, a larger population. And so when I went back to be a teacher, and that's actually kind of what prompted me, I actually kind of drove down the middle of the road of not necessarily math. When I went to grad school, I focused on statistics curriculum, which was being pulled into the math curriculum at a faster rate than it used to be. And so really it was just an interest that just came more and more apparent. So when I taught AP statistics, and when I taught statistics, like the first rule of data with statistics, and I would tell this to my students, I said, well, the first thing you do when you get a set of data is, and they all know, you draw a picture. Well, that was the terminology I would use. I wouldn't say visualize it, which is funny because that makes sense. But we just said we would make a picture. We would either draw a histogram to look at the distribution of the variable, or box and whiskers, or all these charts and graphs helped people make sense of the data that they were trying to parse, and not just looking at the summary statistics. And that was what I was teaching. So if you can see, there was a little bit of a journey there, and not necessarily just a light bulb. And so when I was teaching AP statistics and I was trying to teach them how to work with data in a more reasonable way, I said, you're not going to walk into a corporate job with your TI-84 calculator and be able to go, oh, I can do this. So I started teaching them how to work with Excel, and then that's how I found Tableau. And Tableau was really eye-opening for them too, because like, we can do this so much faster. Every AP exam question, every test question they had to answer about data, they had to support with a drawing of a graph, labeled axes and everything. Like, it was so important. So finding this world of people who found data visualization important as an important piece of understanding data was like this magical moment of, oh, there are other people who get this. So that's kind of the journey.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing. I've got a question now for Kelly related to like Kelly, your journey. Can you tell us or explain some about like what is the biggest challenge that you faced in developing your knowledge and skills in career?
Well, I think for career, the biggest challenge I've faced personally is that I'm not a self-promoter. And I think that sometimes, especially as a woman in a technical field, you have to be a self-promoter. And I think that's something that we can do for each other, is help promote each other. When you have a female coworker who does something cool, like make sure, to let everyone know about that. Because I have trouble with that myself. And Karen, I know, is a great ally for me at work. I have other great allies at work that do that for me, but I generally do not have that innately. And then the biggest challenge, I think, in terms of knowledge and skills is just time, energy, and the pace of change. I'm not a mother, but it's especially difficult if you're also juggling family needs in addition to work and community activities. So I don't have that additional stressor, and I still find it difficult to find the time and energy to develop myself in addition to just normal work. So, but the thing is, as I've been in my career a long time, you just see patterns come up and they start to not scare you anymore because hey, I've done this before. So software changes, you change jobs and you need to learn a new industry. It's just, you just learn it. And I think you don't become an expert overnight. And so just understanding that you need to start somewhere and do the regular consistent practice to get started. And I think we're all just the pace of change is just such at this point that we're all just continuous learners, and that's the mode we need to be in. And so just start somewhere, start at square one and get learning.
Definitely. One more question, and I'm going to direct this one to Kelly, because we'll kind of move in towards talking about like where we are today and like what we're doing now in our current roles and jobs at work. So Kelly, just like tell everybody what you enjoy most about what you do. You said you're principal data engineer. Just tell everybody like what is it about your job that makes you love what you do?
Well, my title is data engineer, but I work, I'm in an area of the business, which is HR, which is, we call it people, but it's traditionally been underserved from an analytics perspective. So I act as part data engineer, part data curator, and part business analyst. So the really fun part about my job, I have to juggle a lot of roles, but I also get to work all across the data lifecycle. So from getting data in from a vendor and building the pipeline to actually generating insights and building dashboards. So that's pretty fun, because what's really fun for me, whether I'm building a data pipeline to support another analyst to build a dashboard or whether I'm doing it myself, what I'm doing is helping people see their data for the first time, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah, I feel like that too. I feel like one of the most fun things about doing this type of work is just like right and left brain, like getting to think through the logic of what you're doing, but also just like there's a creative element. You're creating something from scratch. That's really fun. This next question is for Anna. In your opinion, are there differences, Anna, in the professional lives of women versus men? And if so, what are some differences?
Yeah, so this is again, like you said, in my opinion, in my experience, when I was a teacher, it's a very female-oriented profession. There were not been many males. And when one of us had a kid that got sick, that most of the time it was the mom to pick up. So, our male colleagues would like, hey, your wife gets to go do it, but I mean, we kind of would joke, but there was an element of that. Now I have to say my husband is fantastic at sharing a lot of these duties, but I will say when the kids were really little in daycare, I was the drop off and the pickup. And especially if I wanted them sooner, like if I wanted them to stay late at daycare, daddy could pick them up, but that was like that kind of additional thing. Now this is I'm speaking from a mother point of view. Now from a woman point of view, that there's so many elements we could get into here, so I'm just gonna I kind of wrote down a few things. I think professional expectations are still different. How we come across at the boardroom, if I say something pointed versus if a male says it the same way, we can be misread completely. there's a lot of different layers to the way the expectations are laid out for males versus females. I do believe it's getting better, but in the data world, we're still seeing it's more male dominant world. I was actually hung up on by somebody I was interviewing to be a trainer because he thought it was the wrong number because he didn't expect there'd be a female boss. So we're seeing things played out in different ways, but ultimately I would say, and how we have to manage our career and we have to manage things, I see it a lot different from how my husband gets to go to his day to day.
No, absolutely. Stacy, so a question for you. Do you feel there is an issue with gender parity in the tech industry?
I think there is. I mean, the tech industry, it's a big field and there's a lot of different parts of analytics, and some places are better than others and some companies are better than others for sure. But I think it's still pretty true that there's just, the numbers are still skewed more heavily toward men, and even to the point where I was at the Google Next conference recently, and they started converting the women's bathrooms into men's bathrooms because there were just so many more men at the conference that they had to stand in line at the bathroom. And so it's not just like perceptions, it's not just surveys, it's like a real thing, but sometimes you're just in rooms with one woman or maybe two. It still happens, especially in more technical areas. I think where I see kind of the way that it sort of plays out is, I think anytime you have sort of one group that's way more represented or more represented, if you're not in that, you can kind of have a burden of proof sort of that you carry around with you. And I think in analytics, even though it's numbers and you can prove everything you're doing, there's a lot of trust that goes in that the person who's giving you some information, especially if it's not results that you want to hear, that they know what they're doing. And you really, unless who's going to QA every piece of code you do? Nope. So there's a lot of like reputation that's actually really important in analytics to get the more high profile and high importance assignments. And I think sometimes there can be a drag, and it can take a little bit longer to establish your reputation, to be really on the front, to get those top assignments. And I think I've personally seen, and not just, with myself, that sometimes there's there's an extra burden of proof put toward women, especially in some of the more technical fields, that to really show that they have the competence, and that's not always required from other people. And so I think it's there, and I think I especially, so if you get into like middle and senior management, you can also see it play out where there's there may be a tremendous number of very talented women in the early stages of their career, and then it just kind of narrows, I think, pretty substantially, at least in what I've observed directly.
Yes. All right. I have a question for Kelly. Kelly, what do you think the greatest hindrances to gender parity are? Have you had any experiences that made these obstacles maybe like real for you, or have you seen them have negative impacts on the lives of others?
Well, so since I work in the HR space, we kind of talk about these things as pipeline issues, which is getting good candidates in, and retention issues, which is keeping them. And so when I think about getting women into technology, part of it's a pipeline issue. Are women learning about being exposed to these career options when they're young, like before they're going to college? Are they feeling comfortable when they're there? We hear a lot about kind of the sexual harassment issues that happen in the data science, like PhD pipeline. And, a lot of women are just giving up because they don't want to deal with it. And when I think about it, we've made a ton of progress since I was in college. When I was in engineering school, my first programming class, I was one of 6 females in a class of over 100. So we've made a lot of progress since then, but, like, you're just not always comfortable because you're the other, or to Stacy's point, there are so many opportunities to be seen as less competent than your male colleagues. Exactly what Stacy was talking about, where the way I've seen this play out for me in roles I've had in the past I used to call it bringing your credentials. Like I just had to prepare. I had to prepare for every meeting and bring my credentials. So every meeting I was in, I needed to think about why I was valuable and like basically be prepared to defend my resume for a small, basic project. Whereas my male colleagues would just say like, oh, I'd like to help with that. And there were no questions asked. But with me, it's like, well, do you know how to do that? Have you ever done that before? That kind of assumption of competence is one of those things that just kind of makes you feel uncomfortable. So that I think it causes women to exit the pipeline and then also exit once they're in the industry. So I think that's really one of the biggest things is just being othered while you're in the role. And then also there are just things that particularly impact women, particularly around family. So again, I'm not a mother myself, but I know my fellow panelists can talk about this. If you are a manager or a business owner and just think about your policies and how they might affect people with families. So leave policies, flexible work assignments, things that make women feel comfortable and not have to ask for things that are different from their male colleagues.
Yeah, I think it was Anna, maybe it was you, like making the point that there's so many, when you were working in teaching, how many female coworkers. I mean, I go to the kids' elementary school and there's like one male teacher I think I've ever seen over there, and he's the coach, like he's the PE teacher. And I think the reason for it, like at this point, perhaps women do hear about these types of jobs, data, technology, like these roles. It's like, I think people know about them now, and perhaps there's just as many women interested as there are men. However, until like caring for family members is like 50-50, until that's genuinely like split between, like the expectations are genuinely like my husband will get the kids just as often as I get the kids and all of those things, it makes me think like perhaps we'll continue to see like teachers, for instance, predominantly female, just because it's the type of role that you can have and have kids and you're always off when they are. I think that really appeals to whoever the primary caregiver is. Would you guys agree? I'll ask one more question. I think I have maybe like one or two more in this little portion. And I'll say this to Nelson, if you're listening, and if there are any questions coming through and there is a good point to ask them, feel free. You can interrupt me or us or whatever. And if there's like a good spot to ask them, feel free.
Yeah, we got one for later, but we'll hold off.
Okay, no problem. This next one is for Anna, and it's, what's the best advice you've received and how did you apply it to your work?
Unmute. There you go, unmute. Hard question because, well, at my age, I've had a lot of good advice. Gonna have to go ahead and tell you, there's a lot of advice I didn't take when I was younger. But I would say more recently and ongoing, has to do with career change. I've had a couple career shifts here and there, if you didn't notice. I would say broadly, you don't know what you don't know. So ask questions, talk to people. You cannot live in a bubble, and this is males and females, that this is the best advice I ever got, because I wouldn't have known that Tableau existed to be the next step in my career had I not asked people questions of, what do you use in your day-to-day to help you work with analytics, because I have to teach my students how to get a job later. And it was just this, a friend of mine, she worked for Marketo, and she's like, well, we use Tableau. And I'm like, what's this thing? I'm going to download it. So it was just one thing after another, asking people questions. I like to quote, my pastor is Andy Stanley. So if you're in Atlanta area, you might know who this is. He said, be a student, not a critic. And I think this kind of follows along, really like be a student, listen, have an idea of what other people's perspectives are. And because again, you don't know what you don't know, right? You only have your own perspective. You only have your own seat from wherever you're sitting. And he gave the quote, it's from Sam Harris, but Andy Stanley is the one I got that quote from. He quoted Sam Harris and said, pay attention to the frontiers of your ignorance. So I feel like we can all be better people, moms, teachers, students of the world, if and invest in our career, their path, journey, wherever you are, if you can kind of step back and listen to what you don't know and ask questions and learn from other people.
That's great. This question is kind of more for everybody, so we can just take turns, but I'll start. Stacy, if you want to take it first. At this point in your career, what do you think your most impactful contribution has been?
Well, where I'm at now, I think I spend a lot of time developing analysts and hiring. We tend to hire really young analysts at my company. In fact, I have an opening right now if anybody wants to switch jobs. Anyway, and I think that I've done some things, I think, specifically to change how I hire in a way that I didn't intend for it to really be an advantage to women specifically, but it has been an advantage to women. We used to do like more of a conventional kind of hiring thing where people came on site, you know, we do that. And what I found was that the initial hiring phases were bringing in a lot of people who could talk a lot, but who didn't really have the core skills. And what we found was that women were consistently understating their actual skills and what they would do. And if you asked them to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5 in their competence in, you know, in SQL or in statistics or whatever, they were always giving themselves a 2 or a 3. And then some other candidates were, they were a 4 or a 5. And those were the people that were being brought in. So we switched to a virtual hiring model where rounds 1 and 2, we never saw who the people were, and we actually had them showing us their work and really doing it. And it totally changed the kinds of people that ended up in our final round interviews, because it was people who could actually do the work, and they would talk about it, and we would see the passion, and I think it really fundamentally changed sort of who we were getting in our positions. And I think it's changed, you know, and so I feel proud of having, you know, I can't say I was smart. I just, you know, we were just, please God, let's not have another interview with somebody who in the first 30 minutes, we knew they didn't know what they were talking about. But it's ended up really creating a different kind of mix for my group all together. So I'm really proud of that. That's what I spent my time doing.
That's awesome. Same question, Kelly.
So the longer I've been in my career, the more I've realized that the legacy I'm going to leave is other people. It's not necessarily what I've done. Now that I've been in career for a little while, I can see all of the young analysts that I've mentored or trained over the years, and you know, they've proliferated out to various companies, different parts of the companies that I've worked at. And it's been really fun to watch their growth and know that I was a little bit of a part of that. Helping them on their way, and they often will come back to me on LinkedIn and thank me for something that I taught them. So I've just realized over time that it's about sharing your knowledge and not just you being the best, but helping other people be the best. And so Chick-fil-A founder Truett Cathy had a saying, how do you know if someone needs encouragement? It's if they're breathing. And I think that's a really good thing to remember. Everybody starts somewhere. I saw this on a blog a long time ago, and I wish I could remember. It was a data science blog, and the blogger was actually a female, and she said, she struggled with starting a blog because she didn't think that she was an expert enough to start a blog, but she got some advice that was, you're not blogging for experts in the field, you're blogging for you 6 months ago. And I thought that was really great advice, no matter what you're doing, whether it's blogging or thinking about speaking up at work or helping someone with a dashboard. There's always somebody who was you 6 months ago. So you always have something to add. So just encourage people. Maybe somebody is 6 months earlier in their journey, and you can just encourage them and give them resources and, just tell them, hey, you're doing a great job. I was there once too. So I think just realizing encouragement and teaching and mentoring are really important.
Absolutely. Anna, same question.
Very similar. answer to Kelly. So first of all, I thought of this question and I was thinking impactful to who? Because if I can't really measure other people, but I can measure myself. And so I feel like what's impacted me the most is teaching, whether that be kids, whether that be adults, because I teach adults now, whether that be my blogging. And it's not that I feel like, oh, I gave somebody something. It's that every time I teach, I feel like I get something new from someone else. And I mean that when I learn something, somebody else opens my eyes up to another resource. But I also just feel that completion, I feel whole when I can help somebody else out. And I'm not trying to humble brag there at all. But it's that feeling when I can teach, when I can help somebody through something, whether it be in a formal classroom setting, whether it's just, hey, let's walk through this little trick problem you have and figure out a way together to solve it. Because to me, that makes me feel like my life is complete. I'm doing the thing I'm here to do. Just checking boxes, developing a dashboard will never be that for me. But when we can work together as a team and learn from each other, that is the incredible experience for me.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay.
Real quick, there was a question that came in for Stacy around what the role was that she had that was available on her team. So Stacy, if you give us a couple of details on that for the audience.
I think you're on mute.
I was so excited, I forgot to unmute myself, sorry.
There you go.
It's a digital product and consumer analyst position on my team, and it uses Tableau every day. If you're interested, just find me on LinkedIn and let's connect, and I can send you, and also I can send it in the question in the chat or something. I can send a link to the position also. I'm excited if somebody's interested.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for asking, Nelson. All right, and the next few questions are more about like shaping the future for women in data, like to the future, like to come. So this one's kind of for Stacy. Stacy, how can we adjust? You kind of touched on this already, but
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I mean, it was kind of like a good spot in two different questions, but maybe how can other companies like learn from what you did and adjust hiring practices to ensure that women are hired into tech positions, at least at the level and salary where they deserve based on like the actual work that they're doing?
So a couple of things. I talked about kind of moving toward more evidence-based interviewing, because I think if you really are talking about what skills people have and what they can do, that levels the field in the right way. Because now it's not, it's really people being able to show what they can do. I think also this is, I expect every person I extend an offer to, I shouldn't say this on this form, but I expect a little negotiation. And I think women should expect to negotiate for salary right out of the gate. And never feel tentative about it. And if I have somebody who doesn't negotiate when I extend them an offer, I'm usually a little surprised. I expect a little bit of that. And I also as a leader, work hard to make sure that, especially when I bring in young people into their first job, that I level them correctly and fairly. And you really have to assume that everybody's going to know what everybody else makes and work hard. And I see sometimes that's the first part where women get a little bit behind, and then it's harder and harder to make that up once you get into that initial, because you get that % on top of whatever it is, and we can all do math here. And it just, if you start lower, it's a harder place. And I think that as frontline managers who are hiring, we have a real opportunity to bring about a lot of equality that lasts for somebody's entire career. You can make that difference right out of the gate for them. And I think one last thing is we do, Kelly talked about it, this kind of expecting people to kind of bring you said, bring you their credentials, or sort of this burden of proof. I just, I think we all every day can just check that and just say, if you kind of assume that people are competent and, or everyone is competent, it's actually a much better and more healthy way of beginning any working relationship. And I think it allows you to see things that you might be a little bit blind to otherwise. So that's what I think.
Definitely. And one thing I would just encourage, like, not just women, but perhaps if you feel, if anyone is out there and feels maybe like an underdog, or that they have to like bring their credentials or prove themselves, I think some of what Tableau has done with like Tableau Public, it's like a portfolio online. If you have the skills and are looking to like make a name for yourself with what you do every day, you can put your work out there, and it becomes very clear to people that you could be man, woman, whoever you are. Like, it's very obvious to see like who knows what they're doing and who is very who's really good at what they do. So definitely like take advantage of Tableau Public if you haven't already. I do think that's a really good way to showcase your skills and like prove yourself if you want to. I'll direct this next question to Kelly. What do you think we should do collectively to create more opportunities for women to build careers in technology?
So when we think about it as a pipeline problem and also a retention problem, when we think about pipeline, it's about knowing what's available and also knowing it's for you. When I was in high school, my calculus teacher told me, Kelly, if you don't study engineering, I don't know what you're going to do. And it wasn't until that point where I really thought that that was something I could do, because boys go to engineering school. So having somebody tell me like, this is for you. And my dad also was in a STEM career and, encouraged me to explore curiosity about technical things. And, there's that element of knowing that it's for you is really important. So we need to make sure that girls and women, especially girls that are pre-college, know the breadth of technology careers that are out there. It's not just writing code. It's not like sitting at a desk with your headphones on, cranking out code, right? It's there's a wide variety of data careers out there. And especially when you think about data visualization, particularly all the variety of backgrounds just that this panel comes from that, bring us to this work. So, one, we need to make sure it's a thing that it's possible for you to do. And second of all, you need to kind of, be encouraged and know that this is a thing you can do. So one thing that I'm personally doing, Andy Piper and Crystal Myers, you probably all know them. We're partnering with an organization called Girls Plus Data that brings hands-on data camps to middle school girls. And the idea is to expose middle school girls to the breadth of data careers that they could have and actually get hands-on with tools like Tableau and Data Robot. So we're pretty excited about that. But that helps with the pipeline side of it. Like, okay, let's let you know what's out there and let you know it's for you. But then retention, right? Like Stacy mentioned, make sure that we're evaluating competence equally. I find I try to check myself when I'm assuming someone doesn't know what they're talking about. I try to check myself and think, why do I think that? Like, what evidence? We're all data people, right? What evidence do I have to back that up? So I think just making sure that we're evaluating people fairly and evenly, and not just assuming somebody doesn't know what they're doing. I think Stacy said it really well. Let's assume everyone's competent and let them prove themselves otherwise. That's something my current boss does. He'll ask me to do something, and I'm like, oh, you think I know how to do that? And it makes me feel really, really good whether I do or don't. But I think that's really important, making sure that we're evaluating people equally. And so women don't have that extra stress of bringing their credentials. Because the thing about bringing your credentials is you might have the credentials, but when you have to prove your point, prove that you have the credentials and fight to get on that project, to say like, hey, I am good at this, and here are all the certifications that I have to prove that. Now that I've made the argument in favor of myself, now I have the pressure to be perfect, because I better not mess up because I told everyone I could do this. Whereas my male colleagues might just say like, oh, hey, I'll help with that. And they may or may not do it well, but nobody's really judging them by that really difficult standard. So I think, if we're making sure that we're assuming competence and unless proven otherwise, and evaluating equally, that will help a lot with the retention side. And then also, you know, just making sure that women have the same development opportunities, regardless of whether or not they're mothers, you know, that we don't lose women mid-career because, you know, it's difficult weighing family responsibilities with work. And then, you know, another thing we can do with retention is just stick up for women. I had a coworker, you know, and I was in a situation where I was being thought of as less than competent. I was in a meeting where we were talking about kind of the state of Tableau server for our department, and I talked about the dashboard that I had built, which is by far and away the most viewed in our department, and I kind of got challenged about, well, it's just static, you know, you should really have your male coworker show you how to schedule that so that it updates every day. And I was just like shell shocked. I didn't know how to explain that. Actually, I do know how to do that, and I taught him. But after that meeting, my male coworker came to my office and he says, "I don't know why he said that to you, Kelly. You're way smarter than I am." And you know what would have felt really great is if he would have stuck up for me in the moment. And you know, he was early in career, and I wouldn't have ever expected him to do that. But you know, when you see situations like that, like if you can stick up for your female coworkers and just say like, "Hey, she's good at this. She knows how to do that. And she taught me," you know, but just stick up for each other and stick up for your female coworkers when you see stuff like that happen.
That's a great point. But yeah, Anna, what advice do you have for women who want to enter or progress in the field?
So kind of to echo a little bit what's already been said, first, I'm a big fan of advocating. So advocating for each other, but also advocating for yourself. So this kind of mimics a lot of what we said, but you know, we've talked, kind of brushed around the idea of this whole imposter syndrome. I mean, it's not just females that have this, but I would say that I hear it a lot from, we think, well, we don't, if I know it, then everyone else does. And then that's actually just not true. We need to double down on our strengths. We know something, and it's a good thing to know, and we can do this, and jobs are looking for people who can do this. You get out there and you advocate for yourself, and don't compare yourself to the next person, and don't think you can't, because you can. So that would be the advice I give. I had to shift careers very recently and ran into this myself. So I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I suddenly looked at this whole broad spectrum of data science, and I'm like, well, I know this, but I don't know any of that. Well, that's actually just a trick of the brain, because what you know, that information is a strength. And sometimes we need to double down on the thing that we know, and the thing that we know we do well, and be able to play into that. So for me, it was communicating data and working with teaching people to not only calculate things and learn to digest statistics and data situations, but also to communicate those things. Well, I thought, well, I can do it. Anybody can, but that's actually not true. And it's a very, very needed skill set. And so just advocate for yourself, double down on your skill set, because that's your skill set and that's not somebody else's. And then don't compare yourself to somebody else just because they know something that you don't, because guess what? You also know something they don't. So to me, that was an important realization of, like I said, I changed careers. And I do need to add that when I was changing careers, I was told multiple times, what are you going to do? You're just a teacher. And that's intimidating, but it also kind of made me, if you know my personality, I'm like, all right, well, hold my beer and watch this. I think we should all have that drive inside of us, your own cheerleader. And as females, we're not taught that. We're even taught, you know, I taught math. We're taught we're not good at math. We're taught that it's a boys' subject. We're taught that this is a man's world. So we're growing up against this brick wall of what we can and can't do. So being advocates for ourselves, as well as what Kelly says, for each other, is so vital to get this moving in the direction we want it to go in.
I think you're absolutely right. And I'm all about having the attitude of like, I will prove you wrong, because I think that's just really important. 100% agree. Stacy, do you have any suggestions for women regarding successfully, like how to successfully promote or advocate for themselves in their career, like for a promotion or for a pay raise or any situation they might find themselves in where perhaps we've all been there and you feel a little uncomfortable. Kelly talked about it earlier, but I think this is particularly the case a lot of times for women. So do you have any specific like tips or tricks or suggestions?
Well, I think what Anna was just saying about valuing what you have and what you've done, I think is so important. And I think if you don't have a good sense, I mean, it's usually like a two-part thing, right? You want to, if you don't really know where you stand or what it's going to take to be really successful, you should feel bold enough to ask. It's not unreasonable to say to people who are successful in your organization, people who are successful ever, what did you do that was really important, and help me kind of figure out what I need to do if you're at that point. And then once you've actually done it, I think we're all data and evidence driven people. And I think you applying the same, if you were making an argument for someone else, applying that to yourself, and bringing the numbers, bringing what you've done, bringing the results you've had, I think is really is super important. And if you find that and I think I would do that not only for like compensation and new positions, but also for projects. Ask for projects that you want, that are interesting to you, that are on things that are important to your company. I think in particular, things that have a revenue component are one of the biggest catalysts for people's careers. If you're gravitating toward more like expense or optimization things, sometimes that can be a harder play to get those really big the really big opportunities. But then if you've gone through that and you feel like you've made a good case for yourself, and there's, if anybody is interested in, I'm happy to offer more, one-on-one conversation about what this is like, because I've been on both sides of this. If you've done that and your company and your leader hasn't responded in a way that you think is great, sometimes that's a sign that you may need to find a different place to work to, because there's this other part that there's some really great companies out there that are great employers that give you a lot of opportunities, and there's some places that aren't so great. And don't, if you've gone through this process and you feel like you've really made a legitimate case and you're not getting where you need to, it's a big world. It's a really big world, and there's a lot of stuff out there. And if you believe in yourself and have a certain boldness, I think that's going to be the way that you move forward.
Sorry, I got stuck on unmute. Okay. Last question. This is my last one for everyone. So I just want us to take turns going through these ones together. We can start with Kelly, maybe. What guidance would you have for women? So any women, girls that are watching who want to build their personal brand as a leader in data and analytics, what would you say to them?
Well, I'm probably the least qualified person on this panel to answer this. As I stated, I'm not a very good self-promoter, but the things that I've found that have worked really well for me in my career is be willing to help. That's how you get exposure. Volunteering to work on projects, cross-functional projects, especially. To Stacy's point, if you find that you're in a situation where you're not having kind of the upward development opportunities that you would like to have, do you have opportunities to work on cross-functional projects where you'll get exposed to other departments and you can show them what you can do? That's a great way. Just helping in general, right? Like helping your coworkers, being visible and showing what you know by helping others, right? So if your colleagues have questions and you can answer them, then people realize you know what you're talking about. But at the same time, you're helping your coworkers. So definitely help volunteer for projects, and then practice, right? Keep up your own skills. I hate having to, when you feel like you have to bring your credentials, but you also want to have credentials, right? So, you can use Tableau Public to participate in any of the visualization challenges like Workout Wednesday or Makeover Monday. Or whatever, Kaggle competitions if you're more of a data scientist. There's the Prep and Data Challenge if you're on the data prep side. So, you know, just participate in those activities, and particularly Tableau Public, just as Karen stated, it helps you build your portfolio, right? So you can use that as you practice to show what you know.
Same question for Anna. You want me to repeat it? Or do you remember? I'm asking, what guidance would you have for women who want to build their personal brand as a leader in data and analytics?
So my answer is going to be a little bit not enterprise level, but more just global, based on what I've learned and what I've done. So for me, it helped. Again, I was changing careers, so I had to build a brand, and to do that took a lot of putting myself out there. I started using Twitter more for Tableau, as Kelly talked about Makeover Monday. Just put yourself out there sometimes. You can, you don't have to necessarily put all your work out there at once, but you can be part of the conversation. And don't be necessarily critical. You need to be part of the positive conversation. We can all be very positive. Having that Tableau Public, Josh is going to say it again, Tableau Public, he's over here chatting every time it says, and Tableau Public is a fantastic place to start building, there you go, building your brand as well. If you're in the Tableau world, or just in data in general, there are a lot of opportunities out there to have a public profile. Personally, having a blog helped for me as well, but you can also use LinkedIn is a great tool that you can start having conversations and dialogues. Some people have just a video blog on LinkedIn where they're talking about the thing of the day. For me, it worked to have a blog that showcased my how I broke down statistics and these concepts to kind of explain it in a little different way that I had been doing for my students, but now I'm explaining it for adults. So that I have that the Twitter hashtag, like my handle was Stats Ninja, because I created that like when I was a stats teacher, and then all of a sudden people were like, oh, you're Stats Ninja. I'm like, well, I guess that's my brand, and just gonna go with it. So that was what my my blog became. But you don't have to have like a, you know, hey, this is my label, but you do need to put yourself out there a little bit more, and then believe in yourself that what you're doing and what you're saying all speaks to who you are. And then that's kind of the final thing is be cohesive. Try to make sure you're saying the same thing. Figure out in the beginning, like, what is your brand? Who are you? What do you want to represent, or what do you want to be known for, really? What's your why, as Simon Sinek would say? Because at that point you can kind of make those decisions along the way that help build your brand based on this big idea of who you are.
Exactly. All right, Stacy, your last one. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I've got it. I thought, well, I was mentally taking a lot of notes from what Kelly and Anna said. There are so many great ideas. I guess just the last thing I'll say is that that if you know, I love that what Kelly was talking about helping and getting involved and you know, making things better. And I think that that if you can, you know, if you can bring, you know, really making things better and really adding to every group that you're in, I think that's so powerful, and that speaks for you. But I guess the only thing I'll just add to this is there's actually so many, there is such a big field. I love whenever I see somebody truly being themselves. There's so many different kinds of ways to be authentically great in this field. And I think if, you know, if you don't feel like you have to be somebody else, or that you have to be a certain kind of like Silicon Valley type or something, you know, there's so many ways to be great at this. And I think having that confidence that you can be a whole different kind of, you know, you can be so different from your colleagues and still be bringing things, making every project you work on better, helping, you know, answer really important questions. And I think having that authentic feeling and really, you know, remembering for yourself when you're doing that is so important. And then, and my hope is that we see more and more different kinds of people in the field that we're in, and just like more, just more diversity of thought and a background. And I think there's just a lot of opportunities. for that. And so, you know, and Anna and Kelly talked about so many great ideas for how to express that and to bring that to other people too, which you know, those were great.
Definitely. I will say, like, last thing, and then let's take any questions anyone might have. But if you ever find yourself in a position of leadership in data and analytics, and you have the opportunity to reach out and like lift somebody else up, just remember that, and how much, like, how meaningful that can really be to someone. I know I had like the opportunity of meeting Ken Fleur-Lodge, who's now a Tableau Zen master, but I got talking to him at a data night out at one of the Tableau conferences like years ago. I knew who he was because his stuff is, I've been downloading it on Tableau Public all the time. And so we just kind of talked a lot at a data night out, and that was that. And then we follow each other on Twitter. But like probably 2 years ago, he reached out just on his own and direct messaged me and offered, it was like the Iron Viz season, which I've never participated in and really don't have any desire to. But he reached out and took it upon himself to say, like, hey, if you want any help, like if you're considering doing this, I would be glad to help you. Like, I'll help you. I'll look over your stuff. Like, he just offered to kind of be like a mentor, and that like really meant a lot, even though I didn't take him up on it, even though it's just not my thing. I think that can be really meaningful when somebody that is in has made a name for themselves can like reach out to others and just try to like lift them up and help them any way they can. Nelson,
Yeah, shout out to Ken. He has personally reached out to me, and I know of many other women. He's a great champion for women in the Tableau community. I know of lots of people have had experiences where he's reached out to us one-on-one to just be encouraging, encouraging you to be part of a conversation or to get involved in some way. So shout out to Ken.
For sure. Yeah. And maybe he doesn't even realize like how much that really means to anybody. I'm sure he probably forgot it, but it like just definitely like stuck out to me as something like he really didn't have to do. I don't even like, I remember thinking like, you know who I am? This is crazy. Like, it's just, it was really cool. But I think that means a lot to people, and just never underestimate like how much that means to somebody. Cause it really just like is very encouraging. Do we have any questions, Nelson?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple. So ladies, first off, thank you all so much. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and just really appreciate your transparency, your thoughts, your wisdom that you've shared with the group. Hopefully y'all can actually hear me. Apparently, I didn't realize it earlier, but apparently I was unhearable. So we'll have to deal with that later. Does everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up if that's working. Okay, good. All right, so so the first question that we wanted to come back to was from Josh Preston. So Josh mentioned a book, and he said, have any of the panelists read Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men? And if so, he'd be really interested in any experiences you could speak to, or just your thoughts on the book.
I haven't read it, but it sounds great. I haven't read it. Has anyone else?
I haven't either, surprisingly, but it's definitely on my list.
Another one that's on my list is, ever since the last Tableau conference, the book that they shared like in the beginning, you know, they had the author. I've been wanting to read that one too.
Oh, I think it's Quiet, Susan Cain.
No, not the Quiet one, although that one would be good too, but the book
Code Breaking.
The Code Breakers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
That one.
Yeah, that would be fascinating as well. Let's see here. There's another question. Anna answered this, but be curious if there are any other thoughts on this one around getting going with the social media stuff, how to make connections with the Tableau community, even apart from social media, kind of building that brand. And, one thing that I think is interesting, and be interested in your thoughts, ladies, I think there's a lot of different avenues to build a brand. I think you can have a public brand and do the Twitter and the LinkedIn type of stuff, but I think you can have an internal organizational brand. You kind of become known as the person who's the go-to for this and whatnot. And just your thoughts on how you can do one or the other or both in your careers.
I saw the question about, and it's sort of like, how can you do this without using social media? I'll be totally honest that if you don't have a basic LinkedIn profile, that's super important. And you don't have to be out there putting a lot of personal information, but I do think you need at least a basic summary of your experience and some connections that demonstrate that you're a real person who exists in this field. And so I think if there's a way you can find like a comfortable place to do that, I think that's really important. I personally find that LinkedIn is not a super great place. I don't actually appreciate a lot of the requests and contacts I do get through LinkedIn, mostly because they're from vendors trying to sell me things, and they're sometimes super aggressive and all of that. So I am very happy if somebody emails me. You have to do a little bit more legwork, but I think there's also a lot of industry events where I'm really happy to talk to people and we keep in touch. And I think you've heard a lot of people talking about just the power of somebody coming up and talking to you is so tremendously powerful. But again, you're going to have to do a little bit more work if if you're not at an event and you're not messaging directly through LinkedIn to find somebody's email address or anything like that, especially if you're honest and about that you're trying to get going and get advice. I think most people will respond really positively. That's my thought.
Yeah, it does feel
Stacey,
like
I think that's spot on. Go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, everyone I know like has just such different levels of like comfort with social media in general. Like I really don't use it much outside of Tableau, so I can kind of understand where maybe that person's coming from, and that like maybe they just don't really like to be online putting a lot of stuff out there. I will say that I think it is important to just decide like what you want your brand to be. And if you're going to make a name for yourself, if you're going to be going to work every day and trying your best and trying to be the best at what you do, like what is it that you want to be known for? And even if it is just internally, like how is it that you can do those things? And it's a lot of like what folks have talked about today, but like Stacy, the volunteering to do things that get your work out there, like more visible projects, even if it is just internally, I think that goes a long way too.
So another question we had coming in references for the other half of our audience, or no, let me rephrase that. Apologies. As leadership looks at breaking these barriers down, with the help of women on both sides, women in leadership, men in leadership. What is some advice for having what it can be somewhat awkward conversations in the workplace? I know we talked about kind of putting yourselves out there and having kind of taking a risk and whatnot. And so, what are some of the things that if you're the one who is in the leadership position, how can you kind of make a safe place for those conversations? Any great advice on creating that safety where you can have a difficult or what can be sometimes an awkward conversation in this environment?
It's just maybe a situation where you're having to give someone difficult feedback. I'm going to go with that assumption and just say, just approach it as an evidence-based problem, right? Make sure that we're talking about, a specific behavior or a specific action that was not as expected, and just make sure it's not about that person's behavior in particular, but like that they are doing something that is outside of expectations. And especially if you have policies or something you can reference, or stated materials or project requirements that weren't met or something like that. But just try to make it evidence-based, because I think especially in the technical field, we respond to that pretty well. But just make sure that it's not, that it doesn't appear personal, and make sure that it's, as evidence-based as possible.
any more questions?
I do not see any additional questions. Awesome. All right. So again, ladies, really grateful for your time as you've put all this together. I think there's been some absolutely awesome insights. Some of the stuff that I'm taking with me is, just to help people speak up and to be an encouragement, and to, when you see excellence in the workplace, regardless of male, female, to call it out and to draw attention. And then I thought the point around, if you see somebody who's engaging the conversation the wrong way and saying, hey, in that moment to speak up, and to, again, going back to that concept of having a safe place, and if you can help give somebody, some authority in that moment, how valuable that is for the relationship and whatnot. And I think ultimately, if we would all do so much better if we just focus on relationships to cheer for one another and to uplift one another, as opposed to, thinking of people as male, female, and whatnot. It's, my goal in what I do is to help create leaders, male, female, in this space, and super excited about the next generation and the amazing talent that is coming up in this space right now. So really grateful for all of your insights and excited about what the future holds. Karen, anything else for us?
I just want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys just being a part of this. The answers were just so thoughtful, and hopefully all this went pretty well. I mean, thanks, Anna, also for the Kahoot. Nathan, I really love that. Great music choice also. But it was cool. Like, this really was like a bright spot in my day. I really needed this week. And I know for everybody, like, you didn't have to get on this. No one would have known if you were on it or off it or whatever, but like choosing to make this, carve out time in your day, like, thanks. I really appreciate it. It was pretty fun.